Sports and supercar values have been declining since the summer of 2022. The market is down by 9.8% compared to last year. However, some cars were immune to the market trend and increased by 10% or lost almost nothing. Those are the cars you want to own, right? In this video I'll reveal which cars belong to this elite group and how their price trends compare to the rest of the market. Let's start with a little teaser. A car that's relatively affordable, has stable prices and you could have driven for free. I'm of course talking about the 981 Cayman GT4. Prices literally changed by 0% while the median mileage increased. If this sounds like music to your ears, you need to check out this example that is currently being auctioned at Sotheby's Motorsport. You can now bid on this yellow GT4 that comes with ceramic brakes and a third-party inspection report that gives you confidence in the car's condition. Sotheby's Motorsport is a new online auction platform for vehicles priced between $100,000 and approximately $1 million. You can, for example, also bid on this SF90 with Assetto Fiorano package and plenty of carbon options. 2 months ago, an SF90 Spider already sold successfully. Whether you're bidding on the GT4 or the SF90, you want to do it at a platform that combines the best aspects of in-person and online auctions. Register as a bidder at sotheby'smotorsport.com and start bidding. Now before we talk about the cars that didn't lose any value, we need to contextualize the market situation. If you're a subscriber, you probably know exactly where the market is at. If you're not, here's a little summary. Lockdowns, economic uncertainty and government interventions resulted in surging demand and plummeting supply. Suddenly, investing in cars was no longer something for the elite. Cars were no longer traded at exclusive auctions. The increasing numbers of online auction platforms brought the supercar market into the homes of many. It was inevitable. The scarcity level in the market increased and resulted in a playground for speculators, where every purchase seemed destined for profit. Some cars increased by 50%. The growth rate was unprecedented. But beneath the surging prices, fractures started to emerge. In the first half of 2022, the tide shifted and the rules of the market changed. The market topped, and the era of guaranteed profits came to an abrupt halt. Of course, it was bound to happen, right? The growth rate was unsustainable and the invisible hand eventually stabilized the market. Cars were selling slower and slower, causing increasing inventory levels, and speculators could no longer flip cars. It took, however, up until the summer of 2022 before the realization kicked in fully. What followed was something that we didn't see for a few years. Partially fueled by increasing interest rates, cars started to depreciate, and they did so at above normal rates. The average rate for sports and supercars was 9.8% during last year. Let's have a look at some data. Over here we have the US year-over-year price changes for almost all cars that feature on my channel. So what can we see? On the horizontal axis we have the price change compared to last year in percentages, and on the vertical axis we have the number of cars to which this change applies. For example, 27 cars lost approximately 10 to 13%. Now looking at this plot, we can see that the average decline was 9.8% during last year, but that most cars lost between 5 and 15%. Now because this graph contains cars from all ages, it's no surprise that the older cars tend to fall more towards the right and the newer cars more towards the left. However, we can see that there are also plenty of cars that fall outside of this normal range, both on the right hand side and on the left hand side. A few weeks ago we did a deep dive into the cars that you want to avoid. In this video we'll of course look at the cars that are good buys from a value perspective. So the right hand side of this plot. Now looking at the right hand side, we can see that there are only a handful of cars for which values actually increased during last year. As you would expect, the number of cars in this area decreased drastically compared to last year. Let's figure out which cars fall in this category. First up is the Ferrari 360. Over here we have the price trend for the automatics, and we can see that compared to last year, prices are up by 11.2% or $11,000. And by an astonishing 34% compared to the end of 2019. Now compared to the big run-up in 2020 and 2021, we can see that momentum is fading away. The confidence interval shows that the increase has been much more gradual since 2022. There's of course some uncertainty in this trend, as the market size is decreasing, but the midterm trend is still pointing up. The short-term trend displays a little bit of weakness, but I think it's more a sign of stabilizing prices than correcting prices. Unsurprisingly, the 360 has been at the top of the price rankings in almost all videos. Next up are the 997 and 996 GT3s. Starting with the 996s, we can see that prices increased by 3.5% or $5,000 during last year, but that they are down by 4.6% compared to a few months ago. However, the price uncertainty in this market is large, so we need to dig a little bit deeper to figure out what exactly happened. You see, the market stabilized already in May of last year. Cars started to sell slower and this resulted in the end of the upward trend. But there's a fundamental difference between low and high mileage cars. The drop that you see over here is mainly caused by the low mileage examples. Now if you want to see the detailed price breakdown that includes the price changes per mileage category, I recommend that you have a look at the full GT3 market update. I will include a link to that video down below in the video description. Moving on to the 997, we can see that prices soared during the pandemic price surge and have been stable ever since. Compared to last year, prices are up by 3.1% or $5,100. During the last 6 months this was 0.5% if we correct for changes in the market composition. And that brings us to the difficulty of the 997 GT3 market. 997 GT3s are incredibly rare, and that means that there's a high price uncertainty in this price trend. It also makes it difficult to split the trend by the .1s and .2s. The detailed GT3 market update video of a few weeks ago includes that split, so I recommend that you check out that video if you want to know more. If we stay with the Porsche family, we can see that also 997.2 GT3 RSs are holding up well. Over here we have the trend excluding the 4-liter versions, and we can see that prices are up by 5.2% compared to last year. However, also this market is extremely small, and the uncertainty in this price change is large. I inspected some more detailed breakdowns, and I think it's fair to conclude that prices at least didn't drop compared to last year. But I don't think there's enough evidence to really speak of a 5% increase. Let's put now everything that we just saw in the market context. Transitioning back to the market overview plot, we saw that 360s, 996 and 997 GT3s and 997.2 GT3 RSs all increased in value during last year. A great performance compared to the market average of minus 9.8%. However, as you can see, there are a few more models that increased in value, 12 in total. But I didn't show you those because the uncertainty in those price changes is enormous. These are small markets that are heavily influenced by the specific cars that are listed for sale at any given moment. Think for example about the 987.2 Boxster Spiders or the 997.2 GT3 RSs. So instead of trying to judge the price development in those markets, I think it makes much more sense to focus on the group of cars that just didn't make the cut. The ones between, let's say, roughly 0 and minus 5%. These cars still performed exceptionally well. Let's cover that group, but do so at a bit quicker pace. We start with the Evoras and the GT4s. Over here you can see that the 718 GT4 is down by 2.2% and that this is 0% for the 981 GT4. We already discussed in the beginning of the video that GT4s are holding up well. And the same can be said for its slightly less popular counterpart, the Evora. The GTs are down by only 2.1%, and for the 400s this is minus 1.8% after correction for changes in the market composition. They do look like good value, right? You save $25,000 to $30,000 compared to a 981 GT4. Moving on to the other side of the price spectrum, we can see that also 458 Speciale Coupes are holding up well. Values are down by 2.5% compared to last year, but given the market size, I wouldn't attach too much value to this number. The confidence interval shows a relatively stable market bottom since March 2022. In general, this applies to many older Ferraris. Looking at the 599 GTB market, we can see that prices are exactly at the same level as last year. They didn't change at all. Again, it is a relatively small market, so it's important to interpret this price change in the correct context. But also the confidence interval shows a relatively stable market bottom and top since March 2022. Unsurprisingly, the 599 often makes it to these kind of videos and is put frequently on the buy list. Also its newer sibling, the F12, did well. Over here we can see that prices are down by 4.1% compared to last year. We can also see that this drop is primarily caused by the decrease in the beginning of the year. I dissected this drop even further and found that it's mainly the result of the high mileage cars. Now besides this almost parallel shift, the price trend has been relatively stable. So which other cars than the Evora, GT4, 458 Speciale, 599 and F12 falls in this 0 to -5% category? Well, it's a little bit boring, but basically all 996s, 997s and even some 991 911s. We're not going to cover them all because I have detailed analysis for most of them on the channel. So let's just flick through some examples. Of course the GT cars are doing well. Looking at the GT3 and GT3 RSs of the 991 generation, we can see that .2 GT3s are down by 3.8%, .1 GT3s by 2.3%, .2 GT3 RSs by 1.9%, and .1 RSs by 0.4%. All extremely good results. The price trends are then also heavily correlated. They all dropped a bit at the end of 2022, but stabilized during 2023. Looking at the even more exclusive stuff, like the GT2 RSs and the Speedsters, we can see that also these owners have not too much to worry about. Speedsters are down by 2.6% and GT2 RSs by 3.4%. Naturally, the values are down from the market top, but this happened in almost the complete market. Let's finish with some more affordable stuff before we wrap up and conclude. We can see, for example, that also 718 Caymans are doing well. Base models are down by 4.8% and GTSs by 4.7%. For the S models this is approximately 0% based on this graph. But this is an overestimation. I would use the number of the other models as a proxy. Transitioning to the 996 Turbo, we can see that prices increased by 8.2% during last year. However, the state of the 996 Turbos that are listed for sale is improving. The median mileage of the cars that are listed for sale has been decreasing. If we correct the price change for this mileage, we end up at a change of -0.8%. Or in other words, prices didn't change. And with that it's time to wrap up and conclude. If you care about the value of your car, all of the previous models are relatively sensible choices at the moment. We saw that there are only a handful of cars for which prices continue to increase, but that there's quite a large group that falls between the 0 and -5%. This group consists out of old cars, but also still relatively new cars. And all of this means that you could have driven some of those cars basically for free. Past price behavior is of course no guarantee for future price behavior, but there is some information about the short-term future prices embedded in the current price trends. It's also important to point out that these price changes are based on mileage increases that are typical for these cars. If you drive more than the market average, you could offset any value increase and still end up in the red. Last week's video covers this topic in great detail, so I recommend you check out that video if you want to know more. Now, similar to the video about the quickest depreciating cars, so the left hand side of the plot, the aim of this video isn't to persuade you to buy any of these cars. They're after all more often than not irrational purchases. The aim is simply to provide you with the numbers so that they may aid you in your decision making process. Now if you want to know more for any of the cars that you saw in this video, I recommend that you head over to my channel. Over there you can find detailed breakdowns for a large variety of cars. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you next week for a new video.